Hi everyone, in today's lecture we're going to be focusing on middle childhood cognitive development, so stay tuned to learn about Piaget and Kohlberg's moral reasoning as well as Piaget's stages of cognitive development. Specifically, we're focusing on the concrete operational thought, and then we'll touch a little bit on memory and language. On this side, you'll see that we're talking about Piaget's third stage of cognitive development, concrete operational thought. And so this is children's increased ability to reason logically about direct experiences and perceptions. So remember, we talked about different kinds of conservation tasks. So these conservation tasks were not able to be fully completed of children during early childhood, but in middle childhood, children are able to apply new reasoning skills to concrete situations. And in the video, you'll see here that there are interviews with children from 6 to 12 years old, and they're engaging in these different kinds of conservation tasks. And so they have an increased ability to use mental categories and subcategories of flexibility, as well as inductive and deductive reasoning, and being able to simultaneously come up with different kinds of mental combinations to gather information and record their answers. So take a peek at this video and it will allow you to see that children within this age period are able to complete those conservation tasks. So being able to recognize that two substances of mass, even when they are changing the shape or the format, will still have the same amount as they were previously. So one of the classic ones was looking at the different volumes of water, and although they were in different size glasses, they were still the same amount of water. So liquid, mass, volume, all of those different variations can still stay the same, and children during this time period are able to make inferences and logically think about the reasons as to why they remain the same. Other areas of Piaget's concrete operations include transitivity, seriation, and decentration. So transitivity is the ability for children to figure out a link from one fact to another. So a classic example is if A is greater than B and B is greater than C, then A is automatically greater than C. Well, being able to link different kinds of processes between the two factors, and so this is due to an increased maturation within the hippocampus, which typically reaches that critical point around age 7. So right as children are entering middle childhood, they're able to determine links between two different kinds of factors. And then seriation, which we talked about in early childhood, is being able to arrange things in a logical sequence or series. And so this is needed to understand number sequencing. So the amount of things, as well as looking at different principles and categories. So the amount of number sequencing, or you might look at the age of a group of people or the height of a group of people. So many different ways that seriation might come into play. And then decentration. So this is the opposite of centration, and it enables children the ability to focus on more than one perspective or dimension of a problem at a time. This can also be a great way to look at problem solving skills. So if there is an issue or a problem between two peers, children can focus on two perspectives of the problem and come up with different kinds of solutions or ways to work through the problem collaboratively with one another while taking in different perspectives. So there's different opportunities for children to engage in other areas and skills such as social and emotional development and language development. On this side, I have included some great videos that I recommend that you watch that support moral reasoning. So both Piaget and Kohlberg dove into understanding of children's moral development. And so Piaget looked at a couple different areas of cognitive developmental theory of moral development. And so he looked at moral realism, which is where children are able to conform to the authority of rules of a game. And so this is a great pairing with thinking about school-age children and the types of games that they might play. And so moral reasoning may be related to who gets to participate in the game, how do we make sure that everybody's included, so that first stage is perceived by the situation of rules of the game, and then children are getting into more autonomous morality, which is the second stage. And so this is their ability to base their moral judgments on intentions of the wrongdoer. And we see that Kohlberg also emphasized these areas, but he really wanted to focus on the aspect of the view of the moral world from the perspective of another person. And so you'll see here I've included an image that dives a little bit more into pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. And so when we get into the adolescence area, we'll talk more about post-conventional. But for now, we're going to stick with the second level of conventional. And so this is typically beginning in middle childhood. And so we see that this is the stage where the idea of a good boy or good girl orientation of behavior starts to develop. And so this is socially influenced and approved by others. And so we see that within peer groups, children are influenced by one another, and their ideas of moral reasoning can come from the attitudes and behaviors of others. We also see that there is a next step within law and order orientation, and so moral behavior is doing one's duty and showing respect for authority. So this could be related to following different rules within the classroom, so making sure that we clean up after we're all done using the art materials, or throwing our trash away when we're all done, or making sure that we include everybody on the playground. So thinking about the different roles that we have within a socially acceptable and approved space. And so, like I said, I highly recommend checking out these two videos. The first one, The Moral Development of Children, is a great TED Talk that has some complex examples of moral situations that children may be put into, and thinking about kind of the longevity of what that good boy, good girl attitude and law and order morality looks like. And then the second video, Middle Childhood Moral Development, gives different examples of what children might say and how they might behave when presented with a different kind of scenario of moral reasoning, and how they might go about handling that situation and determining the needs of themselves as well as the needs of others. On this slide, I've included information processing. So this is an opportunity to think about how our brains think and what kinds of ways we take in information and how we process them. So oftentimes we think about the different human thinking processes by analogy and how we might compare them to computer analogy, or different ways that we compare our own thinking to that of another person. And so one of these areas that we might engage in information processing is, for example, Siegler. He helped us with learning the number system and designed ways for us to engage in recognition of mental number lines and linear board games. So I love to think about board games as a way to decode information processing, as well as different kinds of games that we might engage in and playing styles. So for example, if we're looking at the information processing area of metacognition, this is a way to think about thinking. So it's our ability to evaluate a cognitive task and determine how to best accomplish it. So thinking about what we know, what current information we hold, and how to then use that information to our best advantage. So I might have current information related to how to engage in designing and building a puzzle, for example, and then I have to utilize what I currently know about how to put puzzle pieces together, look for different patterns within the puzzle itself, looking at color recognition, looking at how the shape of the puzzle might be, and then determine how to best accomplish it. Or if we're going back to the math example, if I'm presented with a mathematical equation, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and then I'm given different numbers to fill in the blanks, I'm able to evaluate the cognitive task at hand. What is A? What is B? What is C? Determine how I can best accomplish it. But as many of us know, most math problems can be solved in a variety of different ways. So if I were to ask you what two numbers add up to get 6, you might say, well, 1 and 5, or you might say 2 and 4, or you might say 3 and 3. So there's different ways that I might evaluate the presented proposal of a situation or a mathematical equation, and I come up with a variety of different ways to complete that because I have knowledge of the different ways that 6 can be added up with different numbers. And so this is a great opportunity to help children to think about what they currently know, giving them different kinds of tools to get to one answer. Also being able to monitor and adjust one's performance on a task. So I might provide children with different opportunities to learn and get the same answer to a math problem. So I might provide some children with rulers and ask them to measure 6 inches, and then I might give other children string and ask them to measure 6 inches, or I might give children a pair of shoes and ask them to measure and see if they can get 6 inches. So measuring their performance on the task, help them to think about different ways to get to one answer. We can also see that having increased executive functioning is extremely important in being able to process information. So this is the requirement of our brain's ability to organize, prioritize, and direct mental operations. And so you'll see that this connects directly to Piaget's aspects of cognitive development and being able to complete those conservation tasks. And so with executive functioning skills, we see that children are able to have increased decision making, self-control, attention, working memory, and problem solving. A great opportunity for children during the early childhood years to start this executive functioning process is routines. And then as we're moving through early childhood into middle childhood, we can see that children will have the ability to engage in self-control and problem solving during the day of their day-to-day routines. So for example, when they're getting dressed in the morning and they need to button their sweater, or they need to zip up their zipper, or even if they're figuring out what kind of outfit they want to put together or how to ride their bike on the way to school, different kinds of problem solving skills, different ways that we might need attention during different tasks within the day. So many different opportunities throughout our day to engage in executive functioning tasks. So I was just talking on the previous slide about executive functioning and how one of the areas of executive functioning is working memory, but that's not the only area of memory that we want to consider for cognitive development. So children have sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. And so we see that with sensory memory, this is our component of the information processing system in which incoming stimuli and information is stored, and it's split for a second, and then it's allowed to be processed. So for example, I'm considering all of the different sensory elements of the stimuli within the world. So auditory, visual, tactile, many different sensory input areas. And I have to figure out how those are all going to be stored within the time frame of an experience that I'm having. So for example, if I'm engaging in a physical activity where I'm playing catch with my friends outside, there's going to potentially be auditory stimuli of my friends communicating, hey, over here, pass it, or watch out, the ball's coming your way. And then I might have visual stimuli of making sure that I'm increasing my hand-eye coordination, and then the touch of the ball, so different components of sensory memory. We also have our working memory, which is the component of processing current conscious mental activity that is occurring during the time frame of my day. And then last but not least, long-term memory. So being able to increase the amount of information that can be stored indefinitely. And so depending on what kinds of components are important to us and are necessary for long-term memory, we may have different areas that we focus on. So there may be things within our lives that stick more than others depending on the significance of an experience and what kinds of opportunities we had during that time frame. So for example, within our long-term memory, we may see that significance within social interactions is something that is stored indefinitely, or a task that we're practicing over and over habitually again. So if we're thinking about different areas of our day-to-day routines, we might see that those are stored indefinitely, whereas our working memory for a process of a quick, how do I complete this equation, or maybe I'm asked to do a quick task within my day that allows me to use different mental activities, but it's not something that I'm typically doing, but I'm using flexibility in my thinking, and I'm using metacognition of things that I already know how to do. Last but not least, I wanted to include a little bit of information on language development. So we see that children know most of the basic vocabulary and grammar areas of language in their first language, and even some in a second or third language by age 6. And they're also able to learn as many as 20 new words and apply grammar rules that they did not use before, such as appropriate endings for ed and s. And a cool thing, around age 8 or 9, children are able to engage in a form of tag questions. So basically, once they ask a question, they're able to engage in making inferences about other people and the perspectives that they're in. And so their questions are tagged onto the end of a declarative sentence. So your text gives some examples of, you want more ice cream, don't you? Or you're sick, aren't you? So those are some examples of different tag questions where they start with a declarative sentence and then end with the questioning aspect. Children can also understand prefixes, suffixes, different compound words, phrases, metaphors, and a variety of figures of speech. And so this is fun because children are able to comprehend and enjoy puns, and they're also able to engage in that questioning aspect and have new cognitive flexibility and social awareness, which makes them more likely to engage in telling jokes. And so I have included a fun little video of a child who is telling jokes on stage. So I recommend, if you want a good laugh, that you check that video out. And have a wonderful rest of your day or evening whenever you're listening to this. And I will talk to you next time. Bye, everyone.